Hi, my name is George, and firstly I'd like to say that of all the classes I have taken in college so far, this has been one of the more eye-opening and self-reflective ones I have taken. This course actually makes you think and reflect on not only yourself and your life, but it also highly encourages you to try and step into the shoes of others. These other people may be exactly like you, but their lives may have been very different given the treatment they may have received, given the color of their skin, or cultural upbringing. This course successfully attempts to open up your eyes and your mind a little bit and to be more thoughtful of other races and cultures, as well as people who you are probably judging basing off of both of those premises. The materials in particular really left an impact on me as we journeyed through the coursework, were Mirzov's work regarding the Hooded and Shadow archives in our first reflection, McIntosh's list of white privileges in our second reflection, Greg Deal's fantastic documentary on his social experiment focusing on treatment and stereotypes of Native Americans in reflection 3, and lastly the doll experiment, which has resonated in my head since reflection 4. So as we know, what Mirzov regarded as the Hooded and Shadow archives are collections of photos that depict people in a particular manner as to pose an effect on the viewer. For example, the Shadow archive simply showed the actual tone of someone's skin, therefore allowing the viewer to make presumptions about an individual without knowing a single other thing about them. The Hooded archive was darker, in reference to a collection of photos that were taken of lynchings and social torture towards African Americans of past and present. These images were timeless, lasting well beyond the generations they were taken. Photography holds no remorse, as pictures of the lynching of Emmett Till clearly go to show. These two particular images I have chosen speak volumes with silence, one being the funeral line for Emmett in Chicago, and the other shows his mother sobbing next to her son's open casket, which she demanded so that the world could see what violence had come to her 14-year-old son. Brutality was not hidden from photography, and it is the most accurate account of history ever created. What looking at such images makes you realize is that the sad truth of it is that some individuals in our society have carried these racially driven false beliefs with them all this time, reflected in the fact that these images are still relevant and being so heavily analyzed and discussed now. Marzov's work focuses on the depictions viewers take from photos seen throughout history, and in many ways focuses on how white people in particular have analyzed these pictures and what racial stereotypes they have enforced. On another note, Macintosh proposed a list that is honestly aimed specifically at white people as a whole, and designed to make them evaluate the privileges they probably hadn't considered themselves to even have. For myself as a white guy, I found it intriguing and very daunting at the same time, to go one by one through those numbered snippets referencing such simplistic daily routines and events that can be so drastically different for white people than for others was so relatable and irritating at the same time. As I continued reading them, I continued to realize that so many of them applied to myself and other Caucasian Americans, but the question Macintosh actually ended up bringing up was creeping into my mind as I was reading through them. It is one thing to acknowledge these truths, but what can we do to stop them from happening? She describes it so perfectly well as an invisible knapsack that we carry around with us day to day, so many people being unaware of the simple fact that these things are undeniably true. The connection between Macintosh's work and Mirzov's is a trend that attempts to look at the way white people as a collective have created and enforced stereotypes about other races while also being unaware of their liberties in doing so. Then there is Greg Deal, who performed a social experiment to document the depictions made publicly about his Native American attire and heritage. He would walk around public, in the streets, in parks, and shops, and he would record himself and catch the reactions and encounters that he had with members of the public. Many of the statements he received were very stereotypically driven and culturally shallow. His objective was to capture these interactions and highlight the negative energy and societal norms surrounding Native Americans in the United States and how they are viewed and depicted by other cultures here. This also goes in theme with the previous two materials I mentioned. The three of them all work towards exposing the racial and cultural discriminations by, in many cases, white people, but also in Deal's case by all other cultures living and visiting the United States. The best way to combat these flaws in our thinking are to get them out in the open to be discussed and confronted. Then, of course, there's the honestly disturbing doll experiment. I just find it so appalling and wrong that these kids actually grew up in a world where they literally associate good and bad with white and black, and that they actually prefer to play with something like a white doll because they think it is just the right or better option. I find it so saddening, and I was genuinely taken aback that kids so young had been subconsciously taught to disregard their own race and to correlate white with being normal. The doll experiment in some ways goes further than my previous examples to analyze the minds of young kids who weren't white and to see how deeply seated racism is even when it comes to objects and what kids might perceive as good and bad. All in all, this experiment goes right into line with the theme of these materials, and that is the depiction of black and white throughout history as seen and enforced in society by pictures and media. Honestly, many of these materials this semester have made me feel a bit ashamed of America, and particularly of my white peers and the generations before us, who to this day still seem to be blinded by racial stereotypes and delusions of racial superiority and inferiority. We are all exactly the same, down to the bone, and skin tone is such a shallow reason to judge another human being. It's frustrating that we still need these reminders, and this course provides works written to help give those truths and force people to reflect on themselves and as society as a whole.